Hello Mayhem Makers, I'm Mindy with Quilting Mayhem. Welcome back to Summer Sampler 2022, and today we are working on block 2, which is a rail fence. I'm going to show you two different ways to do this block, and as we've said, this whole sampler quilt along is kind of beginner friendly, skill builder, so this is another one of the more popular ones that is taught for beginners, because we are going to show you how to work with sewing longer strips together, but I'm also going to show you a method where you can cut your strips shorter and just line them up and sew them as you go. All right, so I thought I'd just kind of give you a couple varieties because one may just seem easier than the other. Sewing strips generally is a little faster way to do it, but a lot of times you end up with kind of some waviness in those strips. So I'll try to show you how to work with that issue as you go, so that hopefully it's not too much, going on in your sewing. We're going to try to avoid that waviness. So start out with cutting your strips the size that you need, and then you're going to place your fabrics right sides together, and you're just going to stitch down one side with a 1/4 inch seam. And it really doesn't matter beginning and ending because we're going to trim it off, so you don't have to be like super exact as you would with quilting in this beginning and end join. All right, so I'm just going to make sure that my edge here is straight and start sewing. And when you cut longer pieces of fabric, you do want to make sure that you're lining your fabric up so there isn't a twist at the fold. That is very key to making sure that your strip itself doesn't turn out wavy. I'm just going to sew. And what's going to happen, you're just going to have a nice 2 long sets. Okay. So you have this big long set, then you're going to press and open it. So I always start, this is just a new thing I started doing, and I find it gives me flatter seams. So I just do a little starch spray, and then I do like to set that seam just because it locks in those threads. Here, we'll get you a little more this way. All right, so those cotton threads are going to lock in with the cotton fabric. I use Orifil, which is 100% cotton, for my piecing. And then I just press that seam open. And then press the other side. A lot of pressing. All right, so you're gonna do for all your strips, and you're gonna end up with a section that looks like this. All right, so this is what we call a strata. And what happens when you do a strata, we will get you over here now, is that you now have 4 strips together, hopefully mostly straight. So you take your ruler, because I need a 6.5 inch square, I'm just using a 6.5 inch ruler. Best key for trimming is I'm going to try to make sure that I line up where 2 of the fabrics are joined together in that seam with the ruler. All right, so wherever it may land, I'm trying to line it up as best as possible. Now if it starts to curve or shift, you may need to move your ruler down or up to find the best, straightest section of your fabric. So keep in mind, as you potentially trim across a really long piece of strata, you may have to trim excess off to get away from that wonkiness, because you do not want one of these if it's got a big bend in it. All right, so then you end up with squares that look like this. All right, now if you find that strata is really driving you crazy, really super wonky, what you can do is cut them. Now these are 6.5 inch blocks, so cut them by the 6.5 inch width and just sew them. Big key here will be that you want to make sure that your beginning and end are matched up every time. Otherwise, you're still going to have a block that goes wonky where it starts and finishes. But you just do the same thing. You line it up, you take it to your machine, and sew it. And we'll scooch back over here. And then you'll press. I'm going to do 2 of them at a time. So I'm going to do this other set. Same thing. Match up that beginning and end. Do your 1/4 inch seam. Or if you find that your blocks end up a little skinny, they aren't quite 6.5, do what they call a scant 1/4 inch seam. Where your seam is not quite a 1/4 inch. I do have a YouTube video that talks about 1/4 inch seams and how to get scant 1/4 inch seams. So if you're struggling, maybe go find that video. That has some helpful tips on how to use even different feet, different marking on your machine, all those kinds of things to try to get it to match. So I'm going to press these open. I'm not pressing too hard because I don't want to warp these. If you press too hard with your iron, you could potentially force the fabric to start to warp, and you don't want that either. We're doing everything possible to not have curvy blocks. All right, so then I just take these 2 guys, place them right sides together, do the same thing, match beginning and end. So my 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to press it. The nice thing with this block is when you go to lay all your squares together, you're not having to match as many seams, which is kind of nice. So you don't have to do as much pinning in the final block assembly. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm just going to give that a final quick press. I do press open. You may have been taught to press to the dark side or one side or the other, and that's okay too. It's all personal preference. It's just the way I've kind of converted to, because I used to press everything to the dark side, and now I like them open. I like them nice and flat. To me, my blocks just seem nice and flatter, just flatter in the quilt, versus having them all kind of lump over one way or the other. All right, so then when you start taking your blocks, so this is Strata cut and this is cut with just 6.5 inch strips, you can't tell the difference, so pick what makes you happy. But all you're going to do is start laying it out per the design. So one's going to go up, one's going to go sideways. All right, you're going to put it right sides together. Now feel free to double check your blocks. So once you cut these, I mean, if you're cutting them from a Strata, they should already be 6.5. If you're doing the 6.5 inch strips, you want to double check and make sure it fits, which it does. Then you can go do this, right sides together. Now this is what I mean. So see, this is a nice straight flat side. This side has all the seams. So you're not having to pin. You just line up your edges. Make sure they stay lined up at the beginning and the end. And sew that seam. So what we're doing is making a row. So it's going to be 2 blocks across the top, 2 blocks across the bottom, and then we're going to join them. And just make sure you're laying everything out per the diagram, because I would hate for you to get to the end and not have it quite look the same. We're going to do the same thing. So this side has 4 seams, or 3 seams. This side has the straight edge. If all of a sudden you have 2 pieces laying right sides together and all the seams line up, you have it laid out wrong. All right. And I generally sew with this, like in this scenario, if there's a straight one on top and seams, I put them on the bottom. That is another personal preference. I find that I can keep the seams flat and not flipping over as I sew. if I leave them on the bottom, because I make sure that when I lay it down, everything's nice and flat. And I don't have to worry about my foot catching it, flipping it back over, all those kinds of things. So that's why I keep these guys on the bottom, keep them nice flat. Otherwise, sometimes they accidentally might get caught, flip. It happens even when it's on the bottom. And that's okay. You can pick it out, redo it, or I even just snip it right where it joins and open it up. All right, so there's that guy. We're gonna do some more pressing because we're almost there. We're just gonna join these two guys together. And be done. I love this block. It looks a lot more complicated than it really is, just because you have the stripes going in different directions and it makes kind of a pinwheel design in it. So it's a lot of fun. So just make sure, so this is one row, this is another row. See how I've got it doing this fun little pinwheel design in the middle. So here's what you need to make sure you do. When you put these two rows together, you're going to pin right at that center. That center seam is going to match. So you want to pin that seam. If you're definitely a beginner, please pin at the beginning, match those corners, and pin at the end. Because if you don't make sure these corners match up, your block's going to do this in the middle. You don't want your block doing that. Because once you start putting it together with other pieces, that curve is just going to keep going and it gets worse as it goes. All right. So unfortunately, this is going to have some seams on top that we need to make sure stay flat and seams on bottom, but keep them pinned. Take it straight to the machine. 1/4 inch seam. Okay. Take the pin out before you get to it. And I just keep making sure that everything's lined up. So right here, we'll turn you a little bit. So I'm making sure everything here stays lined up and these seams stay nice and flat. So I kind of have my finger here. You can use a stiletto. Tailor's awl, a pin, you know, whatever. Just don't get your finger stuck in there, please. And I'm going to get to that seam and I'm going to stop, pull that guy out. And then these ones are all seams on the bottom. So I'm making sure they're flat. So I'm just kind of looking at it, making sure they're nice and flat. And same thing, making sure the straight edge on top is all nice and lined up. Stopping, taking that pin out. And then cutting. Apparently the machine's a little tired, not wanting to behave either. All right, same thing. We're going to come over here, starch that final seam, lock it in, and then press it open. I double check all my seams. If anything looks like they're maybe starting to pop up, I press them again. I just really like nice flat seams. Sometimes I do, at the end of each block, I may just give it a little starch, keep it nice and crisp. And do kind of an all over, but don't, like I said, don't be like pressing and shoving, because that fabric will do things you don't want it to do. All right. And then here we have block 2 rail fence. Keep in mind, if you don't like my layout, please switch it around, you know, if you're using these fabrics, or play with the fabrics you have in your layout, because this is how it will turn out. It's going to have kind of this spinning effect. So things to keep in mind, you may change how your fabrics play in there. All right, guys? So there's your rail fence. Good luck. If you need any help, reach out to us. Just message us through Facebook, Instagram, emails, info@quiltingmayhem.com. Call the shop, come see us. Whatever you need, we'll gladly help you. All right. Otherwise, have a fabulous day and keep on stitching.